Dr. Miles Archer, a human medic stationed on the remote but bustling trade hub Xanthus 5, had long grown accustomed to the unexpected. The frontier station attracted species from all corners of the galaxy, and his clinic saw everything from exotic infections to bizarre injuries. But when two towering Targesian guards entered his office, their silver armor glinting ominously, he knew this was no ordinary case. "You are Dr. Archer?" one of them asked, his voice a low rumble. Miles nodded, setting aside his tools. "That's me. What can I do for you?" "You will come with us immediately. The Queen of Targus 4 requires your expertise," the guard said, his tone leaving no room for negotiation. Miles blinked, caught off guard. "The Queen? Targus 4? Isn't that King Zorvak's domain?" The other guard inclined his head solemnly. "Correct. Her Majesty is gravely ill. Your reputation precedes you." Miles hesitated. Targus 4 was notorious. Ruled by King Zorvak, a tyrant feared across the galaxy for his unrelenting grip on power, the planet was a symbol of both immense wealth and ruthless control. The thought of entering Zorvak's court was daunting, to say the least. "What's wrong with her?" Miles asked, his medical instincts kicking in. The guards exchanged glances. "We do not know. The royal physicians have failed. Your expertise in xenobiology has been specifically requested." Miles considered his options. Refusing the request of a king like Zorvak wasn't exactly an option, not if he valued his life. With a resigned sigh, he grabbed his portable medical kit and followed the guards to their waiting ship. The journey to Targus the 4 was swift and silent. Miles studied the planet from the ship's viewport as they descended. Its shimmering cities, built atop lush, glowing forests, looked almost tranquil, a stark contrast to the stories of oppression and rebellion that defined its history. The ship landed on the palace's private platform, and Miles was escorted into the grand halls of the Targesian royal palace. The architecture was breathtaking, with crystalline walls that refracted light into cascading rainbows. But the beauty was tempered by the ever-present guards and the somber expressions of the staff. As they approached a heavily guarded chamber, the lead guard turned to Miles. "You will address her as Your Majesty. Speak only when spoken to. The king will tolerate no disrespect." "Got it," Miles said, his voice steady despite the nervous flutter in his chest. The chamber doors slid open, revealing Queen Nalia lying on an ornate bed surrounded by monitors and medical equipment. Her normally radiant silver skin had dulled to a sickly gray, and her breathing was shallow. King Zorvak stood at her side, his imposing figure a stark contrast to her frailty. His crimson cloak billowed slightly as he turned to face Miles, his piercing black eyes scrutinizing him. "You are the human medic?" Zorvak asked, his deep voice commanding. Miles inclined his head. "I am. What are her symptoms?" "She is dying," Zorvak said bluntly. "Our physicians have failed to save her. You will not." The unspoken threat hung in the air, but Miles focused on Nalia. He approached cautiously, his scanner already in hand. "May I?" he asked, nodding toward the queen. Zorvak stepped aside, his expression unreadable. "Fix her." Miles began his examination, his scanner humming softly. As he worked, he noted the unusual signs: erratic neural activity, fluctuating blood pressure, and an alarming level of toxins in her bloodstream. "This isn't a natural illness," Miles murmured, half to himself. "Her system's been compromised by something external." Zorvak's eyes narrowed. "Explain." Miles straightened, meeting the king's gaze. "It's a toxin, likely ingested or introduced into her system deliberately. I need to analyze it further to identify a treatment." "You have the resources of the entire palace at your disposal," Zorvak said. "Do what you must, but if she dies, so do you." Miles swallowed, but nodded. Determined. "I'll need time." Miles set up a temporary lab within the palace, utilizing their advanced technology to accelerate his analysis of the toxin. The compound was unlike anything he'd encountered before, an intricate blend of synthetic and organic components designed to disrupt the Queen's unique Targesian physiology. As he worked, Miles was acutely aware of the clock ticking down. Zorvak's presence was a constant weight, the king frequently entering the lab to check on his progress. Miles kept his responses brief, focusing all his energy on synthesizing an antidote. Late into the night, as he scrutinized the toxin's molecular structure, a soft voice interrupted his thoughts. "How bad is it?" Miles turned to see Queen Nalia, her eyes half open, watching him from her bed. Despite her weakened state, there was an undeniable strength in her gaze. "It's bad," Miles admitted, pulling a chair closer to her bedside. "But I've seen worse." Her lips curved into a faint smile. "A human medic treating the Queen of Targus 4. My husband must be desperate." Miles chuckled softly. "Desperate enough to drag me across the galaxy." She studied him for a moment. "You're different from the others who have tried to help me. They were too afraid to tell me the truth." "I don't see the point in lying," Miles said simply. "I'll do everything I can to save you, but I need you to trust me." "I do," she said, her voice growing fainter. "You're my only hope." Miles returned to his work with renewed determination. Drawing on both human and alien medical techniques, he crafted a serum designed to neutralize the toxin while supporting Nalia's recovery. The process was painstaking, every calculation critical. Hours later, as the first rays of dawn filtered through the crystalline walls, Miles approached the Queen's bedside with a syringe in hand. Zorvac, who had been standing vigil, tensed. "This is it," Miles said. "It's not perfect, but it's her best chance." Zorvac's expression was unreadable as he nodded. "Do it." With steady hands, Miles administered the serum. The room was silent, every eye fixed on Nalia as the antidote coursed through her veins. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, her breathing steadied and a faint glow returned to her skin. "She's stabilizing," Miles said, relief washing over him. Zorvac stepped closer, his gaze softening as he looked at his wife. "You've done it." Nalia's eyes fluttered open, and she managed a weak smile. "Thank you, Doctor." Miles exhaled, the weight of the past hours lifting slightly. But as he met Zorvac's gaze, he knew his journey in the palace was far from over. Saving the Queen was just the beginning. Queen Nalia's recovery was a miracle that spread quickly through the royal palace. Miles Archer found himself lauded as a savior among the court's staff, but he couldn't ignore the gnawing sense that something darker lurked beneath the surface. The toxin that had nearly killed the Queen wasn't a natural occurrence, it was deliberate. As Nalia's strength returned, so did her sharp wit and keen awareness. One morning, as Miles adjusted her treatment plan, she addressed him with a tone that was both curious and commanding. "You've been quiet, Doctor," Nalia said, her silvery eyes fixed on him. "But I can see it in your face. You suspect something." Miles hesitated, glancing at the royal guards stationed at the door. "Your Majesty, the toxin in your system. It wasn't an accident. It was engineered." Her expression hardened. "And you believe someone within the palace is responsible?" "It's a possibility I can't ignore," Miles replied. "But I'm a medic, not an investigator." Nalia's lips curved into a faint smile. "Perhaps not, but you have keen instincts, and you've saved my life. That makes you someone I trust." Before Miles could respond, the doors opened and King Zorvac entered, his presence commanding the room. He strode to Nalia's bedside, his gaze softening only slightly as he saw her improved condition. "You're stronger today," Zorvac said, his deep voice betraying a hint of relief. "Thanks to Dr. Archer," Nalia said, "but he's uncovered something troubling." Zorvac's expression darkened. "Explain." Miles hesitated before speaking. The toxin wasn't natural. It was designed to target her physiology specifically. Whoever did this wanted her dead. The king's fists clenched, his eyes narrowing. "Then someone within these walls has betrayed me." Later that day, Zorvac summoned his inner council, a group of trusted advisors who governed alongside him. The grand hall buzzed with tension as Miles stood to the side, observing the proceedings. The king addressed his council with barely concealed rage. "My queen was poisoned under our very roof," Zorvac began, his voice reverberating through the chamber. "One of you allowed this to happen, and I will find out who." The council members exchanged uneasy glances, but one man, Lord Kale, stepped forward. "Your Majesty, this is a grave accusation. Surely the toxin could have come from outside sources." "No one outside the palace had access to her food or chambers," Zorvac interrupted. "This betrayal came from within." Miles's presence was both a shield and a liability. He could see the suspicion in the eyes of some council members. Why was a human being consulted in matters so dire? After the meeting, Nalia summoned Miles to her private chamber. "You saw their faces," she said. "What do you think?" Miles sighed. "I'm not a politician, but some of them looked scared, and scared people make mistakes." Nalia smiled faintly. "Then perhaps it's time we make them show their hand." Miles worked tirelessly to refine his analysis of the toxin, hoping to trace its origins. Using the palace's advanced laboratory, he identified a rare compound that could only be sourced from Rinthian crystals, a material mined exclusively on Targus 4. This discovery narrowed the suspect pool, but also raised the stakes. Whoever had access to such a material had significant resources and influence. Meanwhile, Nalia took an active role in uncovering the conspiracy. She enlisted Captain Arvid, the head of the Royal Guard, to quietly investigate the movements of the council members. Miles found himself pulled into their plans, his outsider perspective proving invaluable. One evening, while reviewing the toxin's molecular structure, Miles noticed an anomaly, a subtle marker embedded in the compound's design. It was a chemical signature, likely left behind by the creator. He cross-referenced the data with palace records and found a match. "Lord Keel," Miles muttered, his heart pounding. Before he could act, the lab doors slid open and Nalia entered, her presence commanding despite her recent illness. "You found something." Miles handed her the datapad. "The toxin's design matches materials linked to Lord Kale's estate. It's circumstantial, but it's a lead." Nalia's expression grew cold. "Kale has always been ambitious, but to target me directly, he must believe removing me weakens Zorvac." Miles hesitated. "This could be dangerous. If Kale's behind this, he won't hesitate to protect himself." Nalia's gaze didn't waver. "Then we'll make him reveal the truth." That night, during a formal dinner in the Grand Hall, Nalia and Miles executed their plan. While the court dined, Captain Arvid discreetly placed guards around the perimeter, ready to act at a moment's notice. Miles observed from a distance, his unease growing as Nalia confronted Kale with her characteristic boldness. "Lord Kale," Nalia began, raising her glass. "It's rare to see you so quiet. Perhaps you're reflecting on recent events?" Kale's expression was calm, but his eyes betrayed a flicker of tension. "Your Majesty, I am merely relieved to see you well." "Are you?" Nalia asked, her voice dripping with irony. "Or are you mourning the failure of a carefully laid plan?" The hall fell silent. Kale's composure cracked, his hand twitching toward the blade at his side. Before he could act, Captain Arvid stepped forward, his weapon drawn. "Don't move." Kale glared at Nalia, his mask of civility gone. "You have no proof." Miles stepped forward, holding up the datapad. "Actually, we do. Your estate's records tie you directly to the toxin." Keel's defiance crumbled as he realized his position was untenable. Guards restrained him as Zorvac entered the hall, his fury palpable. "You dared to betray me?" the king thundered. Keel's voice was bitter. "You've ruled with fear for too long, Zorvac. Your time will come." "Not today," Zorvac said coldly. "Take him away." As the guards dragged Keel out, Nalia turned to Miles, her expression a mix of triumph and gratitude. "You've done more than save my life, Doctor. You've saved this kingdom." Miles managed a faint smile. "Let's just hope the rest of the court doesn't hold it against me." For the first time, Nalia laughed, a sound that, to Miles, felt like a rare and precious victory. The aftermath of Lord Keel's arrest reverberated through the palace like a thunderclap. While Keel's removal quelled immediate tensions, the incident exposed cracks in King Zorvac's iron-fisted rule. Whispers of discontent among the nobility and murmurs of rebellion echoed through the halls. Meanwhile, Dr. Miles Archer found himself thrust into a strange position, praised by the king but distrusted by many in the court. Miles had expected his role to end with Queen Nalia's recovery, but instead he was summoned to Zorvac's private chambers. The king, dressed in his imposing crimson robes, awaited him alongside Nalia, who had regained much of her regal poise. "You've proven your worth, human," Zorvac began, his tone measured but heavy with authority. "You saved my queen, uncovered treachery within my court, and demonstrated a loyalty few of my kind possess." Miles inclined his head, uneasy under the king's gaze. "I did what any medic would do, Your Majesty." Zorvac's expression darkened. "Do not diminish your actions. You've earned more than gratitude. Name your reward, and I shall grant it." Miles hesitated, knowing the weight such an offer carried. Wealth or power could tie him to Zorvac's dangerous rule. Instead, he spoke with caution. "Your Majesty, I seek only knowledge. Access to Targus 4's archives, your medical texts, botanical research, and data on the toxins that nearly claimed the Queen's life. That's all I ask." Zorvac's eyes narrowed, studying Miles. "You value knowledge above riches? Interesting. Very well. The archives are yours. Nalia, standing nearby, smiled faintly. A wise request, Doctor, one that speaks of your true character. The following days saw Miles immersed in the archives, a vast repository of Targesian history and science. Assisted by Nalia, whose sharp intellect and curiosity matched his own, he explored the intricate biology of the planet. Together, they unearthed forgotten cures and ancient techniques, many of which could revolutionize medicine across the galaxy. Their partnership grew stronger with each discovery. Nalia, now fully recovered, often challenged Miles's ideas with her own insights, blending the traditional wisdom of her people with his practical methods. "You're not what I expected from a human," Nalia said one evening as they worked late in the laboratory. "And you're not what I expected from a queen," Miles replied, glancing at her with a smirk. She arched an eyebrow. "Flattery, Doctor?" "Observation," he said. "You're a natural healer, not just a ruler." For a moment Nalia's regal demeanor softened. "Perhaps because I know what it's like to be powerless. When you saved my life, you reminded me of the strength in compassion." Miles was about to respond when the lab doors burst open. Captain Arvid, head of the Royal Guard, strode in, his expression grim. "Doctor, Your Majesty," Arvid said, bowing slightly. "We've intercepted a message. It seems Kale wasn't acting alone. A faction within the court is planning to disrupt the kingdom's stability." Nalia's eyes hardened. "Do we know their target?" "Not yet," Arvid admitted, "but they're growing bolder." Miles exchanged a glance with Nalia, their shared concern evident. The poison may have been neutralized, but the danger was far from over. Miles was no stranger to danger, but court intrigue was an entirely new battlefield. As the royal family investigated the traitorous faction, Miles focused on his work in the archives, hoping to find a lead hidden in the data. He analyzed substances linked to Kale's plot, tracing their origins to specific trade routes and suppliers. One afternoon, as Miles cross-referenced shipment logs, Nalia entered the lab with a sense of urgency. "We've uncovered a name," she said. "Veyron, a merchant with ties to Kale. He controls shipments to key regions, including those carrying the toxin." Miles leaned back in his chair, his mind racing. If Veyron's involved, he might still have access to the poison, or worse, a way to replicate it. Nalia nodded. "Zorvac has ordered his arrest, but Veyron's estate is heavily guarded. We'll need evidence to bring him down." Against his better judgment, Miles volunteered to assist. "If Veyron's stockpiling toxins, I'll recognize them faster than anyone else. Let me go with your team." Nalia hesitated, her gaze piercing. "It's dangerous, Doctor. You're valuable to us alive." "I'm not much use if we don't stop this threat," Miles countered. "Besides, you'll have guards, and I trust you." A rare smile touched Nalia's lips. "Very well, but stay close to me." That night, under the cover of darkness, Miles accompanied Nalia and Captain Arvid to Veyron's estate, a sprawling compound on the outskirts of the capital. The team moved swiftly, bypassing security systems with practiced precision. Inside, the air was thick with tension as they searched for incriminating evidence. In a hidden storage room, Miles uncovered vials of the same toxin that had nearly killed Nalia. "Here it is," he said, his voice low, "enough to poison half the court." Before they could act, the sound of footsteps echoed down the hall. Guards burst in, weapons drawn. Chaos erupted as Nalia's team engaged them in a fierce battle. Miles ducked behind a console, his heart pounding as disruptor blasts illuminated the room. Nalia moved with precision, her blade flashing as she disarmed one attacker after another. Miles couldn't help but admire her composure under fire. "Stay down, Doctor," she called over her shoulder. "Not planning to do otherwise," he shouted back, clutching the vials protectively. The skirmish ended quickly, with Veyron's guards subdued. Arvid emerged from the fray, dragging a defiant Veyron into the room. "We have our man," he said, his tone triumphant. Nalia stepped forward, her voice cold. "You betrayed your king, your queen, and your people. Why?" Veyron sneered. "Because Zorvac's reign is a cage, and you're the key to breaking it." Nalia's expression darkened. "Then you'll live in the cage you've built. Take him." As the guards escorted Veyron away, Miles approached Nalia. That was intense. She turned to him, her fierce expression softening slightly. "And you handled it better than most would." "I'm not sure handling it is the right term," he said, smiling wryly. She laughed softly, the tension in the air easing. "You've proven yourself more than once, Doctor. Perhaps you're not as out of place here as you think. Miles looked at her, realizing that despite the danger, he felt more connected to this world, and to her, than he ever expected. Together, they walked out of the estate, ready to face whatever challenges awaited them next. The capture of Veyron, the merchant responsible for smuggling the toxins used in Queen Nalia's attempted assassination, shook the foundation of the Targetian royal court. While the evidence against him was irrefutable, the deeper conspiracy hinted at alliances that reached farther than anyone expected. Dr. Miles Archer found himself increasingly involved in palace affairs, his role as a medic expanding into that of a trusted advisor. The archives had become his second home, but the trust placed in him by Nalia and King Zorvac meant his duties were no longer confined to the lab. One evening, as Miles was meticulously cataloging new compounds derived from Targus 4's flora, Nalia entered the room. Her expression was as regal as ever, but there was a tension in her posture that Miles recognized immediately. "We need to talk," she said, her voice quiet but firm. Miles put down his datapad and gestured for her to sit. "This sounds serious." Nalia didn't sit. Instead, she began pacing the room, her gaze darting toward the door as if expecting someone to burst in. "Interrogations of Veyron have revealed something troubling. He wasn't working alone," Miles frowned. "I assumed as much. Someone higher up, pulling the strings?" "Yes," Nalia said, stopping to face him. "But it's not just one person. Veyron's suppliers were acting under the directive of a larger network, a coalition of nobles who see Zorvac's rule as oppressive. They believe removing him, and me, will pave the way for change." Miles crossed his arms, his mind racing. "And by change, I assume they mean consolidating power for themselves." Nalia nodded. "Exactly. They claim to want freedom for the people, but their methods would lead to chaos. If we don't stop them, the empire could fracture." Miles sighed, running a hand through his hair. "So what's the plan?" "We've identified a meeting of these conspirators," Nalia said, lowering her voice. "It's happening tomorrow night, at an estate outside the capital. Zorvac wants to storm the place and arrest them all." "Sounds straightforward," Miles said, though his tone betrayed his doubt. Nalia shook her head. "It's not. If we move too aggressively, we risk turning them into martyrs. Zorvac's rule is already precarious. We need to expose them publicly, make their guilt undeniable." Miles raised an eyebrow. "And where do I come into this?" "You're coming with me," Nalia said, her eyes locking onto his. "You've already proven your ability to think on your feet. We need someone who can identify the poisons or weapons they might be stockpiling." Miles hesitated, but the determination in Nalia's gaze left no room for argument. "All right," he said. "But if this goes sideways, you owe me a drink." The next night, Miles found himself dressed in borrowed Targesian armor, his medical kit hidden beneath a cloak. He and Nalia joined a small team of trusted operatives led by Captain Arvid, who briefed them on the mission as their transport glided silently through the night. "Our goal is to secure evidence without being detected," Arvid said. "We're not engaging unless absolutely necessary. Understood?" Everyone nodded, though the tension in the air was palpable. Miles glanced at Nalia, who sat across from him, her expression unreadable. "You've done this kind of thing before, haven't you?" he asked. Nalia smirked faintly. "More times than I'd like to admit, you?" "First time crashing a conspiracy," Miles said, "but I'm a quick learner." Her smile widened, but before she could respond, the transport landed. The group moved swiftly, navigating the estate's sprawling grounds under the cover of darkness. Inside, the conspirators had gathered in a grand hall, their voices echoing through the chamber as they debated their plans. Miles and Nalia crept along a balcony overlooking the room, their ears straining to catch the conversation. "We've waited long enough," one noble said. "Zorvac's grip on the throne weakens with every passing day. We strike now, before he consolidates his power further." "And the Queen?" another asked. "She survived once. We can't afford another failure." Miles felt a chill run down his spine as he exchanged a glance with Nalia. Below, the nobles continued to discuss their plans, unaware of the intruders above. As the meeting progressed, Miles scanned the room, his eyes landing on a collection of vials and devices spread across a table. "There," he whispered, pointing them out to Nalia. "That could be what they're planning to use." Nalia nodded. "We need to get closer." As they descended from the balcony, Moving carefully through the shadows, one of the operatives tripped over a loose stone, the sound reverberating through the hall. The conspirators froze, their eyes darting toward the source of the noise. "Someone's here," one of them shouted. Chaos erupted as guards flooded the room, and the conspirators scrambled to secure their documents and weapons. Miles and Nalia found themselves caught in the fray, forced to abandon subtlety in favor of survival. Nalia drew her blade, her movements swift and precise as she dispatched a group of guards blocking their path. Miles, meanwhile, focused on reaching the table of vials, dodging disruptor blasts and ducking behind pillars. When he reached the table, he quickly scanned the vials, recognizing the toxin that had nearly killed Nalia. "They were planning to distribute this," he called out, holding up the evidence. "Secure it," Nalia shouted, fending off another attacker. As Miles tucked the vials into his kit, he felt a hand grab his shoulder. Spinning around, he came face to face with one of the conspirators, a blade glinting in the dim light. Before the man could strike, Nalia appeared, her blade slicing through the air. "Stay close, Doctor," she said, her tone sharp but protective. The arrival of reinforcements, Zorvak's royal guard, turned the tide of the battle. The conspirators were captured, their plans laid bare. Miles and Nalia emerged from the chaos relatively unscathed, though the adrenaline still coursed through their veins. Back at the palace, Zorvak addressed the court, presenting the evidence Miles had retrieved. The conspirators were publicly tried and their guilt exposed, solidifying Zorvak's position while preserving the stability of the empire. After the trial, Nalia found Miles in the gardens, where he was sitting quietly, staring up at the stars. "You're surprisingly calm," she said, sitting beside him. "I'm just glad we pulled it off," Miles said, "and that I didn't end up on a wanted poster." Nalia laughed softly. "You've done more for this empire than most of its citizens. Zorvak recognizes that, even if he doesn't say it." Miles turned to her, his expression serious. "And you? Do you?" She met his gaze, her voice softening. "More than you know." For a moment they sat in silence, the weight of their journey settling between them. But as the stars above seemed to shine brighter, both knew their story was far from over. Together, they had faced the shadows, and together, they would face whatever came next. The capture and trial of the conspirators brought temporary calm to the Targesian Empire. But Dr. Miles Archer and Queen Nalia knew better than to believe the danger had passed. The conspirators had revealed critical weaknesses in the royal court structure, and rumors whispered that other factions were watching, waiting for their chance to strike. King Zorvak, ever the pragmatist, summoned Miles and Nalia to his war chamber. A vast, circular room with holographic displays projecting key regions of the empire. Zorvak's face was stern as he gestured toward the map. "Our enemies are regrouping," he said, his voice a deep rumble. "The conspirators we captured were only a fraction of the problem. My spies have uncovered plans for an even larger assault, one that could destabilize the entire empire." Miles frowned, studying the map. "What kind of assault?" "A coordinated strike on our key cities," Zorvak replied. "They aim to weaken our infrastructure, disrupt trade, and sow chaos among the people." Nalia stepped forward, her voice calm but firm. "We need to act before they can mobilize. If we wait for them to strike first, the damage will be catastrophic." Zorvak nodded. "That is why I'm calling for a direct response. We will eliminate their strongholds and leaders in one decisive move." Miles hesitated. "Do we know where these strongholds are?" Zorvak's expression darkened. "That's where you come in, Doctor. We've intercepted encrypted communications mentioning a central location where their leaders are gathering, a hidden base in the Shavrek's mountains. Your expertise in analyzing their toxins and technology makes you uniquely suited to accompany the strike team." Miles blinked, caught off guard. "Me? I'm not a soldier." "No," Zorvak said, his gaze piercing. "But you've proven yourself invaluable. My men trust you, and so do I." Nalia placed a hand on Miles's shoulder. "You won't be alone, Miles. I'm coming with you." The mission was set. Under the cover of darkness, Miles, Nalia, and a small team of elite soldiers led by Captain Arvid departed for the Shavrek's mountains. The jagged peaks loomed ominously as their transport ship approached, its stealth systems masking their presence. Inside the ship, Nalia reviewed the mission plan with the team, her calm authority steadying even the most anxious soldiers. Miles sat beside her, triple-checking his portable lab kit. "You've been quiet," she observed, glancing at him. "Just wondering how I ended up here," Miles said with a faint smile. "From treating colds on Xanthus Vive to storming a rebel base with a queen." Nalia smirked. "Life has a way of surprising us, doesn't it?" Miles nodded, meeting her gaze. "I trust you, Nalia. Just don't let me get killed." She laughed softly, a rare moment of levity. "I won't, I promise." The Shavrex Mountains were as treacherous as they were beautiful. The thin air and steep cliffs tested the team's endurance as they made their way toward the hidden base. Miles struggled to keep up, his medic's training no match for the soldiers' grueling pace. Nalia stayed close, offering encouragement and a steady hand when needed. Finally, they reached the entrance, a concealed cavern marked by faint energy signatures. Arvid signaled for silence as the team prepared to breach the stronghold. Miles activated his scanner, detecting traces of the same toxin used in the earlier attacks. "They're definitely here," he whispered, "and they're stockpiling something big." The team entered the base cautiously, their steps muffled by advanced cloaking tech. The cavern opened into a sprawling facility where dozens of rebels worked on assembling weapons and distributing vials of the deadly toxin. At the center of the room stood a figure Miles recognized from the archives, General Kalros, a disgraced military leader and one of Zorvak's fiercest critics. Nalia's eyes narrowed as she spotted Kalros. "This ends now." Before the team could act, an alarm blared, and the room erupted into chaos. Kalros turned, his voice booming. "We're under attack. Defend the base." The rebels scrambled for weapons and the fight began. Arvid's team moved with precision, neutralizing threats with calculated efficiency. Nalia, blade in hand, was a whirlwind of motion, her combat skills honed from years of training. Miles, unarmed but determined, focused on securing the vials of toxin. He ducked behind cover, working quickly to neutralize the chemicals with a counteragent he had prepared. The process was risky. One mistake and the toxins could vaporize, poisoning everyone in the cavern. As he worked, a rebel spotted him and charged, weapon raised. Miles braced himself, but Nalia intervened, disarming the attacker with a swift strike. She turned to Miles, her eyes blazing. "Stay focused, Doctor." "Trying not to die over here," Miles muttered, returning to his work. The battle raged on, but the tide turned in the team's favor. Arvid subdued Kalros, who snarled defiantly even as he was restrained. "You think this will end it?" Kalros spat. "Zorvak's empire is a cage. The people will rise." "Not with you leading them," Nalia said coldly. With the rebels defeated and the toxins neutralized, the team secured the facility. Miles slumped against a wall, exhaustion finally catching up to him. Nalia approached, kneeling beside him. "You did it," she said, her voice soft. "You saved lives today." Miles looked at her, a tired smile on his face. "So did you." Back at the palace, Zorvak held a public ceremony to acknowledge the mission's success. Kalros and his allies were tried and sentenced, their plans dismantled. The display of justice and strength reaffirmed Zorvak's rule, but it was Nalia and Miles who garnered the people's admiration. That evening, as the palace celebrated, Miles found Nalia on the balcony overlooking the city. The lights of Targus 4 shimmered below, a reminder of what they had fought to protect. "You're not one for parties, are you?" Nalia asked, her tone teasing. "Not really," Miles admitted. "Too much noise. I prefer this." Nalia smiled, leaning against the railing. "You've changed this empire, Miles. More than you realize." He chuckled softly. "I think you give me too much credit." "No," she said, her gaze steady. "You showed us a different way, one that values compassion and ingenuity over fear." Miles turned to her, his expression serious. "And you showed me that even in a galaxy this big, there are places worth fighting for." For a moment, the weight of their journey lifted, leaving only the quiet connection between them. As they stood side by side, the stars above and the city below, they knew their partnership, built on trust, resilience, and a shared vision, was just the beginning. Together, they would face whatever the future held, their bond unshakable.